Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and we're having a little technical difficulties as always. Our guest should be here soon. He hit me up on Twitter, and I have to be honest, it's my fault because I don't do Twitter or these platforms, and he said that he needed the link via email. The problem is I don't have his email, so I already sent him the link via Twitter. And so we're trying to get that situated right now. So please give me 1 second. I'll be going in. I'm just going to talk on some subjects. And if he's able to get this message and send me the email, I'll shoot him the link, okay? So first I want to thank the chat for joining me. You always in here, I got to wrench you up no way out. I don't even know why you're not even wrenched up. I don't even know why. Hold on 1 second. Let me wrench you up. You should have had a wrench. I think you have a wrench. Hold on. Let me go. Everybody that's listening, give me 1 second. Let me wrench. Oh, he is wrenched. And one of the things it said he wasn't wrenched, and on this one it said he or she is wrenched. So again, I'm waiting for Matthew to hit me up on Twitter. I'm going to keep the Twitter screen up so that if he hits me up immediately, I can send him the link through his email. Hey, Matthew, if you're watching, please either put your email, send it to me via Twitter, and I'll send you the link immediately. But I don't have your email. You and I were talking, and you didn't give me your email. But everyone, welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. Again, I'm your host, Rashid. The other Rashid is busy at his 9 to 5. Okay, we're gonna get into the subject because even though he's not here, the subject of our show is called the Global Roundup, and it is featuring Matthew Ehret. And hopefully we'll have Matthew on the show as soon as he can get this message. But I see Nightly Fireflies. Thank you for joining. Dino, good morning to everyone, to you and to everyone in the NYC. And for everybody that's watching the show. Again, let me say this before we get into the subject matters. Okay, I have to say this over again because I'm not just talking to one. I'm talking to the entire audience. Matthew sent me a message via Twitter, and I'm really new to working Twitter, and I just got his message where he was asking for the link to the show to be sent to him via email. The problem is I didn't get his email. He didn't give me his email. So he and I talked back and forth, but he never got my email. I gave him mine, but in the conversation, I never got his email, and I guess that's how he wants the link sent. But I did send it to him via Twitter. So we're going to be patient, and we're going to hope that he hits me up Twitter or is able to use the link via Twitter and join the platform. But he can copy the link off Twitter and send it to himself, and then use that link to get on the show. So if you're listening, Matthew, you can copy the link that you have on Twitter, the one that I sent you, and use it to access the show. Okay, you can do it through your email, you can do it through Twitter. Because I actually, when I sent you the link, I actually used that very link on Twitter and access the dashboard. So let's go into the subject, the global roundup. Man, things are getting heated. The Chinese are not playing. We see the global South rising up, and we see a desperate global order, the Western-led global order, crashing. I mean, it is absolutely unbelievable. Let's go to something. Let's just pick up a couple news stories and talk about them and chop them up. And I want your feedback in the chat. I want your feedback for those of you who are watching now. Let's go to something. I was watching the latest news, and I didn't put any Patreon articles out about the latest news due to the fact that I believe some of it is hogwash. Okay, I do believe that. And it is always convenient for America to leak stuff or to have things leaked at a time when she's trying to get you misdirection or whatever. That is confusion. That's chaos. Order through chaos. That is the motto of the Mossad. That is the motto of the CIA. All of this stuff. So a lot of the messages that you get from the news and the mainstream and a lot of alternative media sites is to mislead you on exactly what is going on. What we have established here is this. This is no denying that Russia is destroying. He's in the booth. He's in the booth. I'm thankful that he's in the booth. I'll bring him in. Yeah, I got to bring him in. I got to cut what I was saying short, and I got to bring in Matthew. That he was able to access the stream. Matthew, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Tell the audience about yourself, and then we'll get right into it.
Okay, I'm trying to adjust my good behaving webcam. All right, I think I'm okay. All right, yeah, sorry for being late. I got pulled into an interview that went from 2 hours into 4 hours with a really fun African diaspora community, including some diplomats. And again, it was supposed to be 2 hours, and it just kept on going on in a Q&A. So lost track of time. Sorry. Cool. Very happy to be with you. Let me just make sure that I've got my right microphone going here, because sometimes it doesn't capture is my sound coming through okay, or could it be better?
You're perfect.
Yeah. You're perfect. Okay, good. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm Matthew Ehret. I'm a director of the Rising Tide Foundation, a nonprofit promoting East-West cooperation based in Montreal. I'm also the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Patriot magazine and a senior fellow at the American University in Moscow. I've recently authored some books called The Clash of the Two Americas, dealing with the growth, the origins of the U.S. deep state going back to 1776. How did this foreign entity that is very non-American set itself up and maintain a continuous system of controls throughout the United States over the dead bodies of eight American presidents? And if you add Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm X to that, then you can even jack that up a little bit. Bobby Kennedy, who would have been president. So that's a new series of books that I published, and I've been just talking to people about how this shapes our present crisis, what insights this could give us to navigate through the storm into the future. And I guess that's what we're going to talk about today with some geopolitics.
Yeah, you just blew my mind. Let's go back to this deep state thing from the beginning, and then connect it to what is going on right now.
All right. So the deep state is a relatively new term, right? That I think it emerged in around 2014 as a word to put a label on this thing, which has been there and has been given different names over many years: shadow government, international bankers, whatever. Like a lot of people label it with various names, but I like deep state. I like it, but it's a very ambiguous, underdefined idea. So what I've been trying to do is, with a bit of a historical analysis, put some meat on the bones to what that means. So it's not just like homogenous forces working in our bureaucracy to maintain a civil service state or something. It's more than that. And it has a particularly foreign British pedigree to it as well. So there's a few points to jump onto that I have to choose from to address this important question. And I'm going to choose in this case, because you can answer this question in a few ways. In this case, I'm going to choose to go at it the way I do in my books, which is to go to 1776 and get across that there weren't just American patriots versus British imperialists duking it out over tea or not paying taxes without representation or something like that, as we've often been told by dumbed down history books. It was a lot more than that. And on the one hand, you did have very valiant, wise, courageous people who decided for the first time to declare independence and establish a new type of society based upon the idea of the consent of the governed, and that's a very revolutionary idea, right? That after thousands of years of living under hereditary systems of feudalism, which is where law always emanated. The idea that if you study law, the authority of law came from the will of a hereditary elite born into a position of royal privilege that could then induce systems to come online and to do things. Now, that was recognized correctly as being illegitimate for thousands of years. Since the time of Plato, Christ, that's what Jesus Christ was standing up against the Roman Empire, a system of hereditary laws and the idea of might makes right, right? What is true is simply who has the power to impose their will onto the weak. That is what is right. Mm-hmm. That was subverted by the concept that we're all made equally in the image of a creator with the mandate to love and to be instruments of creation. That was a very revolutionary concept that was totally incompatible with the Roman Empire and ultimately led to a very, very deep weakening over centuries of that empire that could not let go of its evil systems of control and ultimately dissolved under its own corruption. And despite that, the concept of what Christ represented, or earlier Confucius and Mencius in China, who also recognized this concept of a mandate of heaven, that there's a law of the creator of the heavens that humankind must willfully obey from a moral and physical standpoint in order to have leaders who have authenticity and the right to lead. If a leader abrogates that mandate of heaven, says Mencius and Confucius, it is the responsibility of the people to overthrow said rule and establish better rules in conformity with the mandate of heaven. So it's interesting how these different concepts in the Christian and Asian matrices both came to certain common discoveries of reality and actualized them in their own specific ways at different parts of the world. But all that to say, it took many more centuries for something like what happened in 1776 to bring it out of the realm of ideas and into political reality. It didn't happen easily. It was a long struggle. So, and Ben Franklin, were it not for him, it wouldn't have happened. Ben Franklin was the father of founding fathers who was able to organize a scientific, cultural climate that would make this possible. And it took him decades of planning to make this occur. So the problem was after the peace process, the Treaty of Paris was signed between the British and the Americans in 1783. You had three different types of Americans emerge. You had the authentic creative forces like Ben Franklin and his allies who made the process happen. Then you had what are called the United Empire Loyalists. These are the English speakers the American colonists who said, we want to stay loyal to the systems of hereditary power. And they left the 13 colonies and they were given sanctuary in British territories in North America. This became Canada. That's why I'm speaking English and I'm a Canadian. So you had those. And they always remained loyal to the British system, and it was British Canada, always to this very day, under the control of a deep state embedded in our constitution, a privy council, unelected bureaucrats, little secret societies like the Knights of St. John of Jerusalem, operating and controlling and coordinating the different governor generals and lieutenant governors throughout each of the provinces, keeping the elected part of the government in check on behalf of a broader global grand strategy. So that's sort of Canada, unfortunately. That was one. So that's two types: authentic American patriots. Then you had those other weaker souls who were the United Empire Loyalists. Then you had the third kind, and I say the third kind with my middle finger for a reason, because they were the Americans who were not American, the ones who basically remained loyal to the British system of the British Foreign Office, the City of London, in their hearts and minds, but on the surface maintained an appearance of being patriots. And here I'm speaking about people like Albert Gallatin, or Aaron Burr, the guy who ends up shooting and killing Alexander Hamilton. So if you want to get a sense of the origins of America's deep state, it's important to look at this second, the Canadian branch and the Americans that are not American branch, to look at that, because their task was to simply bide time and subvert the nation from within, weaken it in every way possible, corrupt it, weaken it, and then induce it to self-destruct such that it could be reabsorbed back into the mother country, the British Empire. And Aaron Burr's task was to use the Achilles heel of America, which was always the dichotomy, the discrepancy between the all men are created equal as the basis of the inalienable rights of the Declaration of Independence, and the fact and the economic reality of a dependency on slave labor. Right? That was always the Achilles heel. Now, there were some states, and I made this point in my recent article on reviving a dying republic, that the trajectory by the 1790s was to eliminate slavery. Every single state by 1793 had abolished the import of new slaves. You had 6 states that had completely illegalized the use of slavery completely, and you had more states that had committed to, within a framework of time, to weaning themselves off of the economic addiction to slavery. Because it's not like a magic wand where you could just say all of a sudden, okay, now economically we're not going to have slaves. It's a difficult thing, because your whole economy and the machinery has momentum of centuries that you have to sort of like change gears in mid-motion. It takes a bit of time to bring in industry, bring in manufacturing, so you don't need to have uneducated slaves doing manual work that animals could do. But there was a commitment, there was a pledge to do that. Now, how was that subverted? Well, this is the origin of the deep state. And again, volume 1 of my 4-volume book series gets at this story in more detail. But Aaron Burr is the founding father of Wall Street. He basically took he took taxpayer money that Alexander Hamilton had organized as Treasury Secretary that was supposed to go towards a water project and the creation of a mechanism in New York to fund a big water infrastructure project. And what he basically did is simply took control of the Bank of New York, took this money, created what's called the Bank of Manhattan as a completely private bank for profit outside of the authority of the Constitution that would then be used for speculating on commodities without actually building anything real. And that, even if you go to JP Morgan's website and in their About Us section, it goes through the history of JP Morgan, and they root this institution in the Bank of Manhattan of 1797. Now, the other element of what Aaron Burr was assigned to do was to create a northern secessionist movement. And what he did first in 1798, and then again in 1800 when he was fighting to become president, and then again in 1804, and then again in 1807. So he did this 4 times. There were these different attempts to basically say, okay, let's dissolve the Constitution. Let's have a special relationship with Great Britain, and let's break free and we'll let the slave states become their own confederation with their own pro-British relationship, and we'll join Canada. British Nova Scotia, British Quebec will become part of that. The good people, right? Maine, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, we'll go north. That almost succeeded, for that project to succeed, it required that Burr would be president. And that's why Alexander Hamilton put all of his resources into making sure that Thomas Jefferson, instead of Burr, became the president, because Jefferson was not friends with Hamilton. But despite that, Hamilton did everything to get Jefferson elected. Why? Because, as Hamilton says, Jefferson at least will not destroy the nation. He's a fool, but he's not willfully going to destroy his country. Burr has no morals and will do it. He's on the payroll of British intelligence, which, as it turned out years later, it became evidence actually did surface in around the 1830s between letters between the British ambassador Anthony Merry to the British colonial office saying, by the way, Burr just lost the election and he wants to give his full service to us. He's our man. But unfortunately, Burr had just died, and it was too late for that evidence to play a role. That being said, what Burr did was subverted. The Union was kept intact. He tried it again in 1804, but to do that again, he had to become governor of New York, the economic engine of the North. And he failed again because of Alexander Hamilton. And he basically created a situation, having already done something that involved Hamilton's son getting killed 2 years earlier. Hamilton went a little bit crazy, lost his wits, and accepted a duel at the same location that Aaron Burr's stooge killed Alexander Hamilton's son, Philip, 2 years earlier, using the same guns. Just to say, there's a story there, right? And that's where Alexander Hamilton gets his ass killed. And Aaron Burr, he that's like one of the biggest successes of his life. And then after that, he tries again in 1807, to go and set up this time a Western Confederacy, a breakaway. And he the idea was to then, you got the Louisiana Purchase, the territory that was just bought by the French, from Napoleon, who needed some cash flow to fight his battles in Europe. He sold that to America, but it wasn't under really the jurisdiction so much. It wasn't they weren't states. It was just a loosely defined territory. And Burr had a network of spies he was working with and he used his influence to get a variety of them appointed to become governors, like Colonel Wilkinson of the Louisiana Territory. And he had a program working with the British to declare war in Mexico, take control of Florida, as well as New Orleans, and then use that new economic might in order to kill the president in Washington and install himself as emperor, which got, unfortunately for him, there was a whistleblower who was playing along, a senator whose name I'm forgetting, who got the names, got the evidence, and then went to Jefferson saying, hey, by the way, you know that there's this conspiracy going on to overthrow you and to do this? And there were congressional hearings, testimonies. Burr was brought in. At the time, not sufficient evidence was at that time somehow presented, but there were enough people throwing tomatoes and eggs and rocks at Aaron Burr. He couldn't live his life, such that he had to escape to British Canada in 1807 with money from John Jacob Astor, get on a ship with letters of recommendation from his nephew-in-law, the Governor General of Canada, who then sent him off to meet up with Lord Castlereagh and Bentham, who were heading up the British Foreign Office, where he lived at this pedophile's house, smoking opium, chilling with prostitutes for 5 years, living in this guy's house, in his mansion, that he calls in his disgusting diaries the best time of my life. And he's deployed then back during this 5-year period to go back to the United States a week before the War of 1812 is unleashed in order to try again. So anyway, that whole story and how he tries again and how this ends up killing Hamilton's bank and why today Americans have been brainwashed to believe that Alexander Hamilton was a Rothschild stooge out creating a proto-Federal Reserve before there was a Federal Reserve. That's a giant Rothschild lie. And the actual Rothschild-run enemies of America who killed the Hamiltonian bank were the ones who took control and created this historical narrative for us, which is at the heart of a lot of confusion and corruption to this very day. So yeah, that's in short the heart of the origins of America's deep state.
I often say that the British and the U.S. are tied to the hip, shoulder, and neck, and you just proved it. A lot of it, because the British, they go along with everything that the U.S., every war that the U.S. prosecute, and vice versa. Is that because of what you just described, the connection with the deep state, that is British controlled or British influence?
Yeah, like everything that America is, because the two Americas, one is based upon okay, so here's a good way to think about it. America, at its origins, was inspired by Greco-Roman ideas, right? It would be a lie to say that the founding fathers were not students studying the writings of Cicero, of Roman thinkers, Seneca, Plato. They were trying to look for what type of, because it had never been done before, right? So they have to look for the ideas of the past. So, and the Roman Republic was a huge influence, especially the writings of Cicero. Now, the other America, so one America models itself, the better America, models itself on the Roman Republic. The other America, the one that crushes Indians, declares war on the Republic of Mexico, destroys a government in Hawaii or Philippines, usually with the help of British brethren, economically, militarily, you name it, intelligence. Or, look at the 20th century. We've overthrown something like 300 different governments and killed how many heads of state at different times, right? There's that other America that's models itself on the Roman Empire, because something happened when Cicero dies. Rome transforms itself from a republic into an empire. And both those are two different species of creature. So one of them had the seeds of moral self-renewal, or this idea of the mandate of heaven. Cicero, being a Platonist, is very clear in his writings on the laws on the Commonwealth that a nation is only viable to the degree that its laws satisfy the greater good, the Commonwealth, right? That the wealth is not just for an elite, but for the whole society. And in that sense, if every individual is participating in varying degrees within that society, every individual has access to express their sovereignty. You don't just have one sovereign, right? One person who's sovereign and gives everybody freedom or can take it away. It's a very different concept that everybody is, because we're born as humans with souls that can discover and participate in creation. We are all sovereign, but that's conditional upon our wisdom, our choices to develop our minds and our hearts together or not. And if we choose to not, then we can choose to become slaves. That's a choice. And then we're not sovereign. But so a sovereign entity, a nation, can only exist if the individuals are aspiring to improve their sovereign ability to think for themselves. So you got these two Americas. Now, the one that works with the British, like I said, is based upon the idea of the empire. We're going to expand the control of an oligarchical elite and impose our will onto the weak and use ever greater rates of slavery. We're going to destroy the local indigenous populations. Instead of lifting people up to a better way, we're going to destroy, crush, and make them slaves. And so with Andrew Jackson, this is really the unleashing of the worst part of America, domestically and increasingly foreign policy. What Burr did when Aaron Burr came back, he revived his machine. He had a complex New York and Virginia-based machinery. They worked together. The so-called New York branch of Wall Street and the Virginia base of the slave power, they actually were working very closely together for the British. Fake, gang counter gang operations. So what he does, he calls in 1815 during the war with the British. He basically calls for one of his key assets, whose house was used as the base of operations in the 1807 effort to try to create a Western secessionist movement, a Western Confederacy. The headquarters was at a mansion owned by a fellow by the name of Andrew Jackson. That was the house out of which Aaron Burr organized this rebellion, or this attempt to create a dictatorship in America. Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren being a personal attorney for Burr, were part of his machine. And he says Andrew Jackson has a reputation of being a war hero against the British. People love him. He's the best guy to make our monkey president, basically. Well, he will serve us well. And he puts all of his resources into making sure Jackson gets elected over John Quincy Adams. Quincy Adams luckily wins the first round, but the second round loses. Now by 1828, Jackson is in. The Aaron Burr machine is back into play. And the first thing that they do is they declare war on Alexander Hamilton's bank, and they focus on this idea of what the IMF loves, right, with African or Greek or other countries, is pay your debt. Don't develop your infrastructure. Don't use your money for your people. Use the money to pay your debt and cancel all infrastructure, which is waste. That's what Burr does. He cancels all infrastructure projects, or most of it, that were being built up under John Quincy Adams, and he destroys the bank illegally. It was even voted against in Congress, his act to destroy the bank, but he does it with a veto anyway, an illegal dictatorial act. And then he takes that new money, because now the U.S. is sitting on a shit ton of money because they're not using it to build rail or canals or schools. And he says, we're going to pay the debt. And, that's the big point of pride for the libertarians who love Jackson, and the myth of Jackson is that he paid the debt and he killed the bank. It's like, yeah, but at the same time as he did that, the nation shut down, and it went through the biggest bank panic of history, or the first big bank panic of its history, of 1837, which was, he basically opened up the markets for free market. He legalized the right of the nation to intervene in the affairs of the economy. He opened up the door to British City of London controls over American behavior, and he basically took all of the natives, the Cherokee in the South, who were living on rich, potentially cotton and tobacco land, and he extracted them and created a system of concentration camp-like reservations. This is known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Cherokee died. And he gave that land over to the slave power, which then resulted in America having, by 1837, 2 million slaves under Jackson's imperial agenda, which also involved setting into motion something that became the war against Mexico too, which Lincoln was assigned himself the duty to stop, which he did in about a decade later. It brought that 2 million population of slaves to 4 million by 1860. So you doubled the population under Andrew Jackson by careful design of getting slaves to breed like cattle. It was disgusting, and he empowered the slave power to become this giant, the fourth biggest economy of the world, financially speaking. So that was something which was designed to destroy the nation from within, just like Burr had tried earlier in the 1790s and all the way up through 1807. That's part of the unresolved aspect of 1776. The war was not won in 1781 or 83. There was these unresolved issues that were capitalized upon by America's enemies, and usually, like I said, these British-directed deep state operations are usually creating alliances with Britain, and this really got bad under Teddy Roosevelt. After McKinley dies, Teddy Roosevelt comes in and ushers in the first most virulent Anglo-American special relationship. Teddy Roosevelt was the guy who oversaw the attack on Philippines, turning Philippines into a colony. He did the same thing as president. He expanded the eugenics laws that were brought to you by British science, the science of purifying the human gene pool and eliminating the unfit, usually people of a darker skin complexion. But really, it was targeting everybody, whites alike as well. And what's his name? Woodrow Wilson, another Confederate-loving idiot from Yale, skull and bones type creature, was brought in to continue that policy of eugenics and empire, which he did under the name of liberal democracy. And the Lincoln Republicans, the people who actually represented the true heart and soul of what the Constitution proclaims, were always fighting against this machine from both parties. And there's different stories of JFK, what he did, what Franklin Roosevelt had done to fight against this deep state in his time, and how this thing took over really with Bobby Kennedy's murder, and how we could feasibly bring it back today, despite the fact that the Anglo-American special relationship is really virulent, and the U.S., especially under the Five Eyes, which is not American-directed, it's British-directed. America is the dumb giant with the brawn that carries out like a machine destructive acts against on behalf of the programmers of the machine. It's not a sovereign entity anymore.
Well, what do you think the preoccupation of Britain and the U.S. and the so-called Five Eyes are with Russia? How Russia consumes their thought, and how they are hell-bent on breaking Russia into multiple regions so that they can pillage the resources.
You answer very simple, or you ask very simple and good questions, which again, like all good questions, could be answered from a few jump-off points, and I have to choose. I won't be as impractical as I was for the first answer for this one, because I was thinking about, do I go to the Bolsheviks? Do I go for the time that Russia saved the United States during the Civil War? Right. Do I go for the Russian application of Lincoln's development policy and protectionism in the 1870s and 80s? Do I go back to Russia's defense of the American Revolution under Catherine the Great in 1780 with the help of Ben Franklin and the League of Armed Neutrality? Do I go to that? No, let's not do that. So instead, I'll just do something more practical. I'll just say, on the one hand, Russia is being punished for not having continued the policies of Gorbachev and especially Yeltsin, which brought in the CIA into a governing position of influence within all of Russia, bureaucratically, academically, and especially militarily and intelligence-wise. The CIA had an office in the Ministry of Defense in Russia in the 1990s, where they had full control practically over Russia's nuclear arsenal. And that was all based on the idea of creating a Western-controlled new rich oligarchy of sociopathic Darwinian, billionaires who would gobble up for pennies state enterprises and remain loyal to Wall Street in London. That was supposed to be the forever model. That was not supposed to end. And under that trajectory, it was very clear that Russia, ethno-nationalist tribal prejudices were being inflamed within. I mean, Russia has like 84 different, ethnic groups that make up Russia. It's a very diverse country. It's huge. And many of them were being cultivated and inflamed to have their own mythology, their own territory that would then carve up Russia. According to this Zbigniew Brzezinski outline from the 90s, it was something like 13 different micro-federations, kind of like this, the balkanization they wanted to do with America a century earlier. That's basically the thing. And Russia didn't go along with that. Instead, you had patriots who had a deeper sense of their traditions, who organized around Yevgeny Primakov, who for a period was prime minister and had a huge amount of influence, was a scientist as well. And he organized a strategy with the help also of certain people who felt the same way in China and also in India, around figuring out how to create an alternative to this global new Roman Empire. And he chose as a young troubleshooter of Vladimir Putin to be the guy who would be brought online to start cleaning up some of that mess. And they didn't have a lot of power. They were really stripped down, bare naked and beaten. So Russia had to slowly bide its time, and Putin sort of played the role of acting the friend of many of these oligarchs, some of whom he knew he had to work with at that time, and that's how real politics works. And when different opportunities presented themselves, he was quick to also pull the carpet out from under their feet. And we saw examples of oligarchs being sent to jail as Gazprom was renationalized. Various privatized state enterprises were renationalized. And, at that point, I think the oligarchy started getting a little bit worried. The Western oligarchy here, I'm not talking about the lower level Russian oligarchy, but the higher up oligarchs in London and Washington, started getting a little bit concerned that maybe they had something that was more difficult to control than they realized. And Putin was playing a pretty temperate game, I gotta say. Like, in hindsight, I didn't know what to think of him either back in the early 2000s. Nobody did really, right? He was playing a pretty. He wore the Machiavellian masks in a responsible manner, and even said, "Hey, how about Russia joins NATO? How about that? How about we join NATO back in 2004? You're saying that, and we'll work together." And some Western officials were like, "Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, how about Russia join NATO?" And other ones who are a little bit more savvy and wise were like, "No, it's a trap. We can't let him in because we know that he's going to influence NATO against NATO's actual interest, which is not the benefit of Russia. We ultimately want NATO was created to destroy Russia and China. It should have dissolved in the 90s when Russia willfully dissolved, and instead they just grew it. And the idea was to make a global world police force under a one world government, which was always the idea going back to, we're on the verge of NATO's anniversary. I think it's April 7th. I think we passed it actually. And the idea was to get around the UN Security Council, where Russia had a veto, as did China, and create this other thing. That's why NATO was created, by a bunch of, ironically, lawfully, of a bunch of British Rhodes Scholars like S. Scott Reed, who was a Canadian Rhodes Scholar, who was the architect of NATO, setting the stage for this thing 2 years before it was brought online. So the purpose was to annihilate Russia and create a global military force that would work in conjunction with the IMF, the World Bank, which themselves were originally, they had one design in 1944 when Franklin Roosevelt was still alive, to be emitters of sovereign, productive credit at low interest for the development needs of the poor nations of the world. That never was permitted to blossom because Roosevelt died April 12th. What day is today? Day of anniversary.
The 10th. Today is the 10th.
Okay, in 2 days, it's the anniversary of Roosevelt's untimely death while in office, likely a case of poisoning by Churchill's gang, who took control of everything Roosevelt was doing and expelled all of Roosevelt's allies from government, like Henry Wallace or Harry Dexter White or Sumner Welles, the Undersecretary of State, also a big anti-imperialist working with Roosevelt and Stalin and allies in China. So they were all expelled, labeled red commies, and the IMF, the World Bank, became instruments for crushing nations using usury and conditionalities instead. So they were working closely with the military world government and the economic world government, and then you had other branches culturally as well to homogenize the world under this master-slave dichotomy, right? In the West, we were going to be consumers who could just be the beautiful, beautiful people of the North, of the Anglo-Saxon-based world community of consumers, where we wouldn't have to get our hands dirty with producing things that would be exported to darker-skinned people or Asians, who would be the dirty producers forever. As our slave colonies, or Africa was going to be this minerals extracting continent of slaves. Maybe we'll give them $1 a day, but really it's slavery. So that was the idea, right? Create a culture for slaves, a culture for masters, and let society just rot that way. So that was the trend and the trajectory, always cultivated by British intelligence, Tavistock, other forms of higher up planning systems. Never really authentically American, like I said. I think Trump and maybe potentially now Bobby Kennedy Jr. might derail, or Trump did derail that to a certain useful way in a chaotic fashion, but still a useful way in 2016. Today, we're at a point where I don't know if it's possible, but I hope it is, to get sort of a coalition of the better people who are Democrats, influenced by the way of thinking of Bobby Kennedy, who said something pretty smart about Russia and China recently. I had my doubts about him, but when he said that, I liked it. Where, he basically said, the same amount of money the West has been spending on bombing countries through the Stone Age is the same amount of money that Russia and China are currently spending to build infrastructure and build friendships. So that indicated to me that he's got more wisdom on the geopolitical level than I had thought he did. And I'm hoping that the better Republicans and the better Democrats can start organizing together really fast instead of bickering amongst themselves about left versus right, which no longer exists. But that's just me musing. I hope it can work though.
Yeah, I don't think I think this may be the end of all of that, because the deep state is so ingrained in their policies. To get into office, you have to be selected, and then you have to agree to certain things. I think you become so compromised that you may have good intentions, but after you become compromised, you have to just go with the flow. And I often say this, that people that start off with good intentions, once they enter the system, they don't change the system changes them. And that's for, if you look around, this shows that the society, the government is in decline. The whole Western world is in decline. And I believe that is one thing that is leading them towards more confrontation with China, with Russia, and with other nations that no longer want to be up under the thumb or take dictates from the Western world. What say you on the matter?
I agree with that. I mean, the thing about good intentions, though, is you got to be careful, because the intentions by themselves without wisdom will be destructive. Even if you got good, nice intentions, if you're not being animated by wisdom, which includes knowledge of good and evil, especially evil, you will misstep. You won't have a guiding star to sort of follow when you're at sea, and you will get lost in the waves, and you will find yourself oftentimes, usually, acting like your own worst enemy, or against the very things that you thought you were fighting for. You might think that you're for democracy as you're leading this pro-democracy protest to overthrow a government that you think is authoritarian. And you might believe that truly in your heart of hearts. And you won't realize that you are just being a weaponized instrument for a will that wants to kill you and your family. As has been the story with far too many poor, useful idiots who participated in color revolutions, who were not bad people. They just didn't have wisdom animating their good intentions. So in that sense, I agree with you. The difference being, if you do have wisdom, now you have to be prepared to die. So that's where it gets tough. That's what sort of separates the men from the boys. And luckily for humanity, there has been a sufficient pool of people who have, at different generations, made the choice to take the knowledge that they earned and the experiences that they earned and mature their identities to such an extent that they were willing to die for their conscience and the health of their souls over keeping their body alive and maybe living a comfortable life till old age. As Martin Luther King, famously said, those who don't have a cause that they're willing to die for don't have a life worth living. And I mean, that was tough to listen to for a lot of people in the audience, because everyone's kind of getting uncomfortable. Like, how into this am I? But you look at people, there have been wonderful souls who are great role models who went through the fire of the fear of death and came out with a stronger conviction of their life having more merit, even if they have to die. We had how many people who died putting down the Hitler project in World War II, right? I mean, these were many, fathers, husbands who had everything to gain or live for with their families living a long life, but they didn't come back from the war. Now, did that war have to happen? Well, that's another story. But the point is, the moral caliber was something that one really does have to respect. And yeah, to a certain extent, the war didn't have to happen because Wall Street and London didn't have to fund Hitler and eugenics. They didn't have to do that, but they did it. But at the same time, had the war not happened after Hitler was like making his moves to declare a global Reich, and after you gobbled up Czechoslovakia with the help of the British, and and now Poland, and he wasn't gonna stop. He was not gonna stop till Russia was a slave colony, China was a slave colony under their Japanese masters. That was not gonna stop. That was gonna be the New World Order. That was gonna be the global Great Reset of 1940. Was that? So when the momentum got so insane that nothing could be done but submit to global feudalism, yeah, at that point I would say the war had to happen. But it didn't have to happen if you take it from the standpoint, like I just said, like none of these people had to fund these beasts. But the fact that Hitler was put down and the New World Order agenda of these globalist inbred elites failed to succeed where they intended for it to succeed back in the 40s indicates to me that they actually have a lot less power on the one hand than they project that they do to us, because they want to get us, their wannabe slaves to perceive them as these uber overlords, superhuman gods of Olympus who have the control of magical powers. In today's case, they're using the language of like AI. We've got AI that can read your thoughts, that can shut down your body. So don't even bother trying to think about a bad thought, because we can, we'll be able to arrest you, like Minority Report, the movie, right? That's the idea. Before you make the thought. That's what Yuval Harari says about hackable humans. He's trying to mindfuck people, but it's not real. Like they don't have these powers, and they will never have those kinds of powers, but they want to psych us out so that we shut ourselves down. The other thing, so they have less power than they want to project. We actually have, through people who are willing to die for their moral principles, with an understanding, a wisdom, we have demonstrated that humanity is more powerful than we often think we are. And look at the case again of, the oligarchy, I always make the point, they don't mind killing, they enjoy killing millions of people. They don't really like killing individuals, which is a paradox, because it's like, why would you prefer to kill millions over one? Well, it's because obviously if you kill a Gandhi, you kill a JFK, you kill a Martin Luther King, you kill a Lincoln, a guy who like grew up in a farm with a grade 4 education, he like lived with bears. Why do you have to kill this one guy and put this whole complex into motion and maintain a lie for generations of a false narrative, right? That's a lot of work over like one guy. It's because it demonstrates that an individual who taps into that source can actually activate something that the oligarchy is deathly afraid of. It's an Achilles heel. So what is that? And I think Putin is somebody who's been through the fire. I think he's thought deeply about his life. I can only imagine what historians are going to tell us about the types of assassination attempts that have already been made on Putin by now. I have no idea right now, but I'm sure there's quite a few. There's been something like 20 Russian diplomats who have died in their tour of duty in the past decade, whether in Turkey, in the Middle East. It's wild in Russia itself. So will necessarily the case be that being a statesman within a corrupt system necessarily eat you up? Well, it didn't eat up Putin, and that was a corrupt damn system in Russia. I would say the Constitution has not been burnt yet. There's still a power that it gives those who wish to wield it and are willing to take the risk of wielding it, knowing that they're going to be invoking the demons of fucking hellfire onto themselves. But it's still a power, a weapon to be well wielded that can still be done. And whether or not, again, the population and those who have a degree of influence on the state, municipal, or federal levels And here I'm thinking about the only thing viable are the Democrats who tend to resonate with the type of messaging that Bobby Kennedy puts out, or the type of Republicans who resonate with the type of messaging that Trump puts out. Other than that, I don't see anything viable in America. I don't see much viable in Canada right now, except for like small little networks, but it's very weak. But America is sort of the center of the battle. That's where there's been 250 years of agenda consistently to undo what happened in 1776 and put that genie back in the bottle. It's just an irony today that America's so-called nominal enemies, their rivals, who are supposedly the most un-American of the world, China and Russia, are actually, if you look at what they're doing on every level, politically, culturally, economically, they have picked up the torch on every single level that matters of Alexander Hamilton, Lincoln, and JFK in terms of what they're doing. And so it's an interesting historical irony I did not expect. And whether that hasn't, again, I think it's contingent upon us to be the best possible humans we could be, representing the best traditions we once had. Because if we don't, that's forgotten. Like we've already gotten like our memories wiped clean from the 60s, where the ethos became, do drugs, don't trust anybody over 30, live in the now. Well, that cut off a whole generation of baby boomers, or many of them, most of them, from learning anything or maintaining the continuity of the thousands of years of civilization that brought them to that moment in the 1960s. We just cut off. And I get a bunch of drugs, LSD, have some group orgies, sex your way to world peace. That never was going to work. But now we've got, 2 generations into that. And of course, the consequence is kids who are being trained to think that believing you're a man or a woman is a sign that you're a tyrannical fascist authoritarian and should be destroyed. That's not good.
Well, we have Kabuto, one of our viewers. Let me put up the comment. And I believe they were referring to when you were talking. He was referring to when you were talking about the plans to dismantle the United States. He says it's the same thing happening in Mexico with AMLO.
Yeah, same thing. AMLO is a guy who I respect him. I mean, he's operating in a very dangerous environment. I mean, I think Putin had it bad in the 1990s. Well, it's probably similar, actually. Mexico maybe is in a slightly better position in some ways, because they last had an authentic nationalist fighter who stood up against the IMF, the World Bank, and the Anglo-American diktats with the form of a relatively recent figure named Lopez Portillo, a president who gave, he did what he could at the time that he did, but he got backstabbed by certain allies that he needed to break free of the IMF back in the early 80s. He needed Argentina, he needed Brazil as 2 other big powers to stand together. Individually, they couldn't do it. But they his what he thought were his allies pulled out of that coalition that he needed, and he was hung out to dry by himself after he did the unforgivable act of nationalizing Mexico's banks and petroleum companies, and putting forth a program for a debt jubilee and reorganizing what viable debts there were under a debtors coalition, along with the non-aligned movement. Indira Gandhi, Thomas Sankara was later on a leading official within this, a young guy who got killed. So, he had a beautiful agenda. He had the courage, as one of the few statesmen of those days, to actually openly call out for the help of an American, very controversial figure who was running for the presidency, named Lyndon LaRouche. He brought LaRouche to Mexico, to the capital, and asked him to lay out a program, a battle plan for the industrialization of a sovereign Mexico. And LaRouche did that in the form of Operation Juarez, which people can Google and read online. It's a beautiful package. And as punishment, Mexico was brutalized by Western speculators after Portillo was ousted, and was punished again. The peso was devalued. The people were brought under the control of a Wall Street set of narco-terrorist drug cartels like the Sinaloa, who have always used Wall Street and London banks to launder their drug money. It's not a sovereign gangster operation, just like the mafia, as Whitney Webb demonstrates in her new book series. Even the mafia, Mayor Lansky and Lucky Luciano, they were never an authentic self-organizing system. They were always under the control of Anglo-American intelligence agencies from the beginning as a weapon against the nation state system itself, which has a multitude of effects that are useful. So, now you got Obrador. He should have been president in 2007. He got ousted by a CIA-run mass protest movement and some election fraud. He got in this time around, while Trump was in office, and he's showcased an ability to dance with the devil and maintain and not get tripped up yet. So he's made some pretty good moves. And I'm hoping that he's got a strong I think he must have a strong network of collaborators, because a president is never a man unto himself.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a president, it's because if you're a president who's legitimate, it means that you've got a network of collaborators who are supporting you, backing you up, and working with you on a variety of levels, especially in the military, which in Mexico you got to have that, who don't want to destroy their people. So I'm hoping that network is really wise, and I hope that they're working, and I think they are, in back channel diplomacy with their Russian, their Chinese counterparts. And I think that that is happening. I've seen evidence of that in Brazil, which is another. I mean, it's been colonized under corporations for over a century. And Lula da Silva is somebody who I was worried about. Up until somewhat recently, and I wasn't sure. Did something happen to him in prison? Because he was unjustly thrown into prison for trumped up charges, right? As far as a political hack campaign. But he had a fighting spirit about him in the 2007-2008 period, the first time he was leading. And I'm like, did something happen to him when he got out? Did he make some deals or something? Because he wasn't being himself. He criticized Russia for the thing in Ukraine. He brought in some tranny operatives into his cabinet, like I think it was his minister of culture or something. I'm like, that's weak. And he had a lot of the worst people supporting him from Davos and Washington, saying that they preferred him over Jair Bolsonaro. So I was like, damn, did he sell his soul? But what I've seen now as evidence is that he's actually been working in back channels, and now he's just come out announcing that all trade between Brazil and China is going to be settled in Chinese yuan. Everyone sees the dollar imploding, and there's been motions amongst African nations, Middle East, South American, Gulf states, Eurasian, Asian, South American, to prepare the groundwork for protecting themselves from the oncoming tsunami of the collapse. So that's good. Is Mexico doing something similar? I goddamn hope so. I really hope they are, and I think they are. Because otherwise I don't see AMLO having the type of cojones to say the things that he has said and done the things that he's done as far as nationalization and utilization of state resources the way he has done. So he better have some international chemistry working with him to make that to make that not go south.
Sergei Glaziev. Glaziev. He is talking about that nations should just default on debt owed to the West because of all of the theft over the decades and centuries of Western nations. And he's also saying that they shouldn't under debt. They just should make a transition to the new BRICS-led financial order. And there's a lot of validity to this, because how can the Western world, under the IMF, the World Bank, or any other institution, demand Africa or Latin America, or even Asian nations, and even some European nations pay back debt when they have pillaged, robbed, raped, and stolen everything to put them in a position of power, which they're in now?
Yeah. Absolutely. Glaziev is one of the wisest cookies in operation in play right now, and he's the Minister of Macroeconomic Development of the Eurasian Economic Union, and one of the key main architects of the alliance between the Eurasian Economic Union that began in 2014 and China, and the Belt and Road Initiative. Both of those things. I mean, the Eurasian Economic Union is a Russian-led coalition of 6 nations, through which things like the North-South Transportation Corridor, which is sort of like a North-South version of the Belt and Road Initiative, has been organized. And so he's a very, very strong mind. He's the only cabinet member under Yeltsin who was, I think he was Minister of Economics in 93, and he resigned when it became clear that Yeltsin's assignment was to hollow out the Russian economy instead of developing it. He resigned in protest. So he's walked the walk, and he's openly given many speeches proclaiming his research. And he's a student and friend of the late Lyndon LaRouche, who I already mentioned once. He wrote a beautiful, or delivered a 13-minute address to a eulogy of the late LaRouche, who died in 2019. And he did this just a few months ago, pointing out the importance of LaRouche's 50 years of organizing and what he contributed to the realm of economic science and political research, or historical research. So he's studied Operation Juarez. He's studied what LaRouche is doing with the International Development Bank back in 1977, which was a prototype bank that had organized various non-aligned movement leaders like Fred Wills, the foreign minister of Ghana, who went to the United Nations and called for LaRouche's International Development Bank back in 77 before he got 5 bullets in his body and still survived. But, the idea was, look, back in the 70s, the debt is illegitimate. That was the argument. That was internationally the thing, all the way from 77 to 81. It was, will the third world actually honor the debts that were put onto their shoulders by the IMF and World Bank usurious lending, or should they be written off and considered already having been paid several times over? Because guess what? When you look at the numbers, they did pay off. If you look at the number of loans given to most of the poor countries of the world, and you look at how many resources have been extracted, how many times they've paid back those loans with interest. Like Argentina paid their loans back something like 5 times over, and are still more in debt now than they were 40 years ago. So it's never-ending debt slavery, and the only way to deal with that is to recognize that the debt is not debt. Debt is only legitimate if you incur it through honest intentions. Like, I got a kid that's got to go to school, or let's say, better yet, because I believe schooling should ultimately be free. So let's say this: I got knowledge of farming. I need some tools. I need a tractor. I don't have those things. Well, I might want to take out a debt to buy those things, but I've got knowledge and capacity to now manifest that in reality to produce food, which within a year, I'm going to be able to start producing revenue, which will pay off the debt if it's incurred. I don't take it out for 30% interest. It should be reasonable, maybe 4-6%. I don't know, something reasonable. Because the person giving, the creditor, is also taking a bit of a risk. So okay, I'm not totally against a bit of interest in that sense, if it's like moral, like reasonable. But then, I'm going to pay off the debt within 2-3 years. It'll be totally paid off. I'm going to now have a farm. I'm going to employ some people. I'm going to grow my system as an authentic capital system, which is where capitalism's authenticity grows, from that idea of creating something, not just consuming and not just gambling with debt, but creating something real that people could invest in, that is going to have measurable effects that are good for people in the real world that exists. Right? Not some computer model, nothing like that. But that's how we used to do things when we were still growing and not decaying, before I was born, unfortunately, and probably before you were born. We used to have this type of spirit. Maybe it was never perfect, but it was there. And that's sort of the basis of Chinese debt today. When you look at the way generally, and there's some examples where this is not true on a local level, like regional injustices, but overall, when you compare the Chinese approach to investment into poor countries, or offering foreign direct investments, and you contrast that with the IMF World Bank approach, it's a different beast. One of them is tied to actually wanting to get projects built. The other one is tied to getting people addicted to conditionalities, and maybe, spreading microloans to little, local businesses to paint rocks to sell to Western dollar stores, like maybe build a local well or a solar panel area for a neighborhood in Nigeria or something. That's what the West allows. What China's saying is no, let's build a nuclear reactor. let's build a 6,000 kilometer high-speed rail across the continent. Let's just do that, and let's train a bunch of Africans. There's 100,000 Africans being trained in advanced engineering in China every year. That are mostly going back and participating in the authentic growth of the African continent. Very different way of doing things. So the thing holding that back is this weight of artificial weaponized debt. It's not debt. And because it's weaponized, it always had the intention of weaponizing and keeping us underdeveloped. It should be erased. It's a number on a computer screen and nothing more. And to erase it simply means you're going to liberate people and maybe preserve a portion of the debt, which you can say after an audit, maybe the small portion is tied to something legitimate. We'll preserve that. And everybody else, from the venture capitalists, BlackRock, all these assholes, they're going to have to just take a lot to go bankrupt. They're going to go bankrupt. And so be it, because we need a new economic system anyway. And Russia and China and other nations, Iran and Saudi Arabia now are quickly moving to create that new economic system. They're going to have an emergency conference on bringing online a new system that is not going to operate the way the Great Reset one does. So we should have that conversation now before it starts killing people. So why not? A preemptive debt jubilee is not a bad idea. Glaziev is right.
Why do you think that the West is so parasitic when it comes to latching on to Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa and some of the Asian nations and trying to keep them in debt, while at the same time on the political scale they're saying that, well, China is trapping them in debt, and it is the West that has the major portion of debt entrapments on these nations? Why is that?
It's not easy, but I would say it has a lot to do with our corruption. I mean, we've drank a lot of really bad Kool-Aid over many decades that has infiltrated us intellectually, spiritually, by design. And what's one way of saying this? We've lost a sense of our true self-interest on the one hand, because ironically, it would be more in our self-interest to help those poorer countries of the world that have suffered so much abuse under colonialism to develop full spectrum economies and stand economically on their own 2 feet. Because what would that mean? Well, for our business community, that would mean we have a higher quality consumer base. Africa by 2050 is going to have 60% of their population under the age of 30. That's a massive consumer market. If those kids are living at a high standard of living, they got extra spending money, they got a good standard of living, they're going to buy goods from us. They're going to also be, if they've got manufacturing, they're going to have finished goods that they'll have creatively brought online themselves that they could trade with us at fair trade. We don't have to use them as slave labor. We can actually buy good stuff from other people. And same thing for Mexico and South America. We could have all of these good things and at the same time supply the vital needs of our own nations internally. We don't have to be hollowed out like Canada. What does Canada do for our economy? We're a resources extractor. That's all we do. For the majority of our economic overhead, it's just extracting resources. We don't have industries to transform raw materials, lumber, into anything useful. We extract that and export that mostly to the U.S. market. But the U.S. also has lost its own industrial base too. Buffalo and Philadelphia and Detroit, which used to be the productive zone of the world, they're hollowed out dark age hellholes now by design. We did more damage to ourselves by exporting our industries than Hitler could have done by bombing them back in the 40s. So again, this has all been done to cripple us and to destroy our ability to both think about what our self-interest is, to stand on our own 2 feet economically. And that's what Trump was threatening when he said, look, America first should be the policy. Protectionism, right? If you use protectionism, if you're a sovereign nation state, it means you have the right to use protectionism. Protectionism means you put tariffs out around your nation to prefer the investments and growth of local farmers and industrialists and entrepreneurs. So otherwise, they have to compete with cheap goods that can be flooded into the market using slave labor, which has always been imperial grand strategy. Every nation should do that. African nations should do protectionism. Hopefully with the African Union that's coming online right now as we speak, they will do that. And hopefully they're also going to go further and utilize national banking. Hopefully. That then gives them the right to emit credit for big projects that you want to build, but you don't have the money. Well, you create the money the way Ethiopia did with the Grand Renaissance Ethiopian Dam. 6,000 gigawatts of hydropower and massive agricultural abundance that is going to be created both for Ethiopia as well as Sudan and Kenya and other nations, Eritrea and even Somalia can benefit. But they did this by funding it themselves. They got their people, just like Lincoln did with the greenbacks and his 520 bonds back in the Civil War. It was not through Wall Street or private banking loans. It was through a national treasury act that emitted the bonds that could be purchased by citizens of America to build the transcontinental railway projects and other canals and things that needed to be done in order to heal the nation from what was self-inflicted. The same thing for Ethiopia. They sold the Grand Renaissance Dam bonds over 10 years, amounting to $5 billion to the people who bought it as a way for the people to invest in the well-being of their own society. So it's a great way to harmonize the individual self-interest of the person on the street who could buy a $1,000 bond with their savings or $100 bond and tie that to the well-being of the nation as a whole. That's how you create citizens who don't just think about their local mini self-interest of I don't care about my nation, I just care about me and maybe my local the immediate family and friend group I have in my immediate tribal vicinity. That's how we get divided to conquer. So you can get out of that culturally by building these big projects and utilizing state banks if they're under the control of the Constitution of the nation and not of private City of London assholes that want to, not every central bank is created equal, right? You don't want it to be used like the Federal Reserve or the ECB or something like that. That's just a tool of control. So, I think that, there's a lot of pathways to the future, but it's got to be a revival of these lost arts of thinking and what our self-interest is. We should be working with our neighbors in harmony. Business community would benefit, as well as people on the rich people, poor people. Everyone would benefit if you just avoid World War III. That is in no one's benefit, even rich people, to have World War III rip across the world, which is what some people are willing to do, unfortunately, in order to maintain what they perceive is their right to control the world, is unleash nuclear bombs. That's not, even the business community, corrupt people who did bad things over the years of globalization should know that is bad for business. And you want to stop it using every bit of influence they can, which is, I think, partially also what was behind some of the business community going with Macron to Beijing this week. It wasn't just Macron going to Van der Leyen was different. They went together. Van der Leyen went basically solo with a bunch of Malthusian technocrats to try to berate the Chinese for supporting Russia. Macron,
did you see what they did to her?
Huh?
Did you see what they did to her?
Yeah.
The Chinese?
Yeah. That was good. But Macron, he brought a whole team of industrialists from France who have they carry weight, on a real level, and they don't want to go to war with Beijing or with Russia. They see Europe is being sacrificed by Anglo-American foreign policy with the destruction of Nord Stream, putting them in the center of a crossfire of a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. They don't want that. So they're using every bit of influence that they can right now to try to build some economic bridges, which emerged as a 50-point strategy between France and China. You can go to the Chinese government website and see what they agreed upon, at least, which is pretty good as far as trying to put out some of the fires. But we need more of that stuff too.
Right. I want to follow you up on something about Macron, and I also want to bring up another subject. But beforehand, I just want to bring something to light to the people. On March 21st of this year, the Russian Federation wrote off $20 billion in African debt. The Russian Federation wrote off $20 billion in African debt. Okay. And it says, according to Russian President Vladimir Putin, at a plenary session of the International Parliamentary Conference with the theme Russia, Africa, and a multipolar world, he signed with the swipe of a pen the debt relief of $20 billion from Africa. For Africa, excuse me. So I wanted to bring that up. Now, Macron himself has been saying that from his trip back from China, he has been screaming to other European nations, do not get involved in the situation between China and the United States and Taiwan. That's their own thing. Stay out of it because it's going to draw us in and we'll be hurt the worst by this. What do you have to say on that? And then I'll bring up the next question.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good common sense thinking right there. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, which is, I mean, it's all over the Five Eyes. It's based on taking the worst elements of what Hillary Clinton and Obama and Biden did back in 2010 by unleashing the Asia pivot, and amplifying that to to the nth degree. So what is that? I mean, right now, the U.S. military-industrial complex has used their colonies in the form of South Korea, where there's 28,000 U.S. military troops stationed still today in South Korea with a THAAD missile shield, which could easily go offensive very easily, pointed both at Russia and China, using only North Korea as a pretext, but obviously it's pointed primarily at Russia and China. On the Pacific theater, you have Japan with 50,000 plus U.S. troops stationed there, and a slightly overly belligerent re-militarist government, which has changed their pacifist constitution to allow for a military intervention in defense of any allies, the U.S. being an ally, Australia being an ally. You could make things up. But basically, that's belligerent. They've got territorial disputes both with Russia and with China. You have also Taiwan, obviously, that's clearly being used as a Ukraine of the Pacific. Clearly, they've all been themselves, the Taiwanese people, subject to a U.S.-directed regime change back in 2014 with the Sunflower Movement that overthrew the Kuomintang pro-mainland party that had, just like Yanukovych in Ukraine, had organized a economic integration deal with mainland China. That was sabotaged, canceled, with these young, useful idiots running in with flowers in their hair into the parliament building, shutting things down, getting a little bit violent, not like Ukraine, but still pretty bad. But they obviously are being inflamed with separatist factions that have been put into power, meeting up with Pelosi, with Kevin McCarthy and others. And now you got Lindsey Graham and leading figures who manage big chunks of the U.S. military saying that we should be prepared to go to war with China, a nuclear weapons wielding power. That's there. Philippines also has been subjected now under Marcos Jr., who's not a bad guy, but I think he's dealing with something he can't control. It's way too much pressure is on him. So even though I think he does want to vector towards China economically, there's been tons of pressure to get him to reinitiate hosting U.S. military bases. Very close again, brings us into the Taiwanese Straits. And so this is what is going to suck the world into hell on earth if it's not resisted. So the fact that Macron, who's not his own man, has been speaking the words of certain power brokers in France who are more rational actors is good. Hopefully we get some more of that with the Germans as well, who have been, beaten down quite a bit. And hopefully this is contagious because, this is not going to go anywhere good.
Yeah. Well, Macron says this, and let me read it. He says, Europe should not let itself be drawn into the confrontation between the United States and China over Taiwan, conforming to the American rhythm, French President Emmanuel Macron said on Sunday. He went further and said, the question asked to us, Europeans, is this: are we interested in the forced solution to the Taiwan issue? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans should follow this suit and adjust to the American rhythm and Chinese overreaction. Why must we move at the pace chosen by others? This is what he said. Now, what's crazy about what's going on in this area is that America always trumpets when it comes to Iran, North Korea, about the denuclearize. But now they're trying to put pressure on China by Australia getting so-called nuclear subs, and even hinting that maybe it wouldn't be bad for Taiwan to get a nuclear weapon or something like that. What do you think the rest of the world is seeing when they hear these open double standards, especially when it is to advance America's quote unquote interests, when in reality, to me, those are setbacks to our interests. But what do you think that the rest of the world, who doesn't have a voice to get the attention of people, what do you think that they're saying and what they're thinking about when they see these international double standards?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot of people who are looking in the mirror and seeing some sacrificial lambs looking back at them. It is what it is.
Wow.
That's the shortest answer I'm not going to give you today. But yeah, it's pretty. I mean, you got to be trying really hard to stay blind at this late stage of rot. You have to be working super hard to stay ignorant to the nature of this game. It's done so much damage to so many lives unnecessarily. And if you're still going along with that at this point, I don't have a lot of hope for those people who are still sucking back corporate media propaganda, telling them to, I don't know what it's telling them, but if these basic facts of life are not yet known, it's too late for you. And you're going to discover maybe after the fight is over that what happened in hindsight, you won't have a clue.
So those of you in the chat, if you have comments, put them up, and I'll direct them towards Matthew. But I want to go back to something I told you. Why is it that the Western world has a problem with anyone infringing on their sovereignty, but they don't think that deploying troops and putting missile bases and military bases on the sovereign soil of other nations is an infringement of that nation's sovereignty and independence? Because America's in Syria illegally, she's in Yemen illegally, she's in Somalia, she's everywhere, and then you have the French. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if this is still the case, but I believe at one time Britain had its largest military base in Canada. So I mean, what?
It's funny to listen to, eh? Like you have Ursula von der Leyen and other Western European technocrats yelling at Belarus, saying how shameful is it for a European nation to host another nation's nuclear missiles. And it's like, lady, you're German. Germany is hosting U.S. nuclear bombs. I mean, the U.S. has been doing that for a long time. And as you pointed out, the U.S. has control of a greater quantity of territory by far over Syria and northern Syria, the richest part of Syria as far as oil is concerned and agriculture, than Russia does over Ukraine. And yet, despite the fact that more lives have been killed by U.S. manipulation in the wars just in Syria alone than in Ukraine, doesn't mean anything to a lot of people. And the fact that, Russia, you could say, oh yeah, but Russia's in Syria too. Yeah, but they were invited there by the legitimately elected government of the people of Syria. That's a different story. U.S. is just occupying it and stealing their food and oil that they desperately need for their reconstruction. They won't let them have it. So you got to lack a total. We talk about the 800 plus U.S. military bases, and the U.S. is chastising Russia for trying to build a new military base in the port of Sudan, one of 12, or China wanting to build another military base in potentially in Ethiopia, but not even guaranteed. They just have a military protection agreement over BRI Belt and Road projects with the Ethiopian government. I think they have two currently foreign military bases outside of China, and the U.S. is chastising China for being the militarist. I mean, my God, the hypocrisy is loud. Or the bioweapons facilities, they call them bio defense labs. It's bioweapons facilities. You kidding me? I mean, there's I think the recent conservative estimate is something like 300 U.S. managed bioweapons facilities. Let's call them biolabs, okay? But whatever. Outside of the U.S. perimeter, 300 plus. China, none. They have 2 BSL-4 labs inside of their own country. A big chunk of these U.S.-run labs are not only in Ukraine, but they're also in South Korea. And South Koreans have been protesting loudly that weaponized anthrax and other forms of Western-funded bioweapons are being developed in their own country. And it's understood. This is part of a weapon against China and Russia or any other nation which chooses to stand up against this unipolar hegemony that's being demanded upon them. So yeah, people are legitimately freaked out by this, and they should be a little bit louder in their protests. Africa has tons of U.S. run labs. Yeah. Bill Gates is all over that place.
Now we'll let one question. He's been busy. Matthew has been doing back-to-back interviews. We'll try to get him back on the show, but we'll go for one comment, and then we'll let him go because I know he's tired. And we'll try to get him back on the show. So we'll highlight this. Matthew, this is for you. Here you go, right here. Matthew, does a move to the multipolar world give any hope for Canada to get from under the thumb of the U.S. and make itself make more sovereign decisions, or is all hope lost for them?
Hey, Nunia, that's a good question. Me being Canadian, I have a lot of vested hope in that eventually happening. And certainly with the collapse of the US dollar hegemony, and the US dollar in general is going to be, the systemic collapse is systemic. It's not a few local banks. When this thing starts ripping apart the system, you're going to know it. There's a positive lining to this, which is what we've been sort of dancing around during this conversation, which is that this whole multipolar alliance has been carefully building itself up over many years. So for the first time ever in human history, we have now several major powers who have been able to regain their sovereignty, who represent diverse civilizational states. They're not just nation states from a legal standpoint. They're civilizational states representing very old traditions and are working together on the basis of win-win cooperation, which, as I've pointed out, now and again, is what the West used to be when we were not drunk on our own hegemony yet. Like in our best of times, we were tapping into that source. We lost that. Can we get it back? I believe we can. I mean, we're humans after all. Humans are you have to have a certain philosophical, or think about this philosophically a little bit, because you're not going to see this, like Canada is not going to just all of a sudden join the Belt and Road Initiative. Like, we're a firmly locked in part of the Anglo-American global complex. Okay, that's a fact of life. But human beings are humans, and we are a creature which is unlike any other creature in the biosphere. I mean, we're talking over electronic devices using light to communicate sound and imagery that your mind registers through your senses as intelligible concepts that induce reflections, all sorts of feelings that no computer can tap into, insights that you can then translate back into your own words, throw back as questions or whatever, or use in your daily life, right? Or be inspired by to live your life a different way. So inspiration, an immaterial spiritual phenomenon, shapes our lives and shapes history. These are things which, again, no computer. So I'm saying this because a lot of people are getting kind of sucked into this whole, like, machines are going to replace human beings and blah, blah, blah. It's a big thing going on right now. No, machines can do algorithms. They can mix up and things that have already been done, but they can't discover something fundamentally qualitatively new. They can't do that. And they can quantitatively process information better than humans, and they have a usefulness for that. It's not like we should get rid of machine learning. It has a role to play in the human economy. But to think that that's going to somehow render human beings irrelevant, not true. So human beings have a soul. We love things like freedom, justice. We're animated to even risk our lives or die for concepts that touch on our great-great-grandkids who don't even exist yet, or the respect or inspiration we have for people like Jesus or Socrates who died a long time ago. We can still tap into these types of immaterial forces that no lion, they will die to defend their cub, but they're not going to die to defend their grandkids life. They don't have that access. They're good for what they're good, but they're limited in ways that we're not, if we choose to. So I believe that there are objective needs that will arise and become more clear to people's minds when the economy blows out. Things that we don't necessarily value or we take for granted, like food, water, electricity. Where do these things come from? We don't think about it when I can just go to the store, pay $2 and get my bottle of water because my infrastructure, the water coming out of my tap is too dirty to drink because my government hasn't been investing in infrastructure for 60 years. Yeah. So, but that being said, we take a lot of these things still for granted. I go to the store, I get my carrots, my cereal. When you have an economic collapse, these things go away. And you start having to really think through what are your values, what are your priorities. So in that sense, the only boat that's going to float when this current Titanic goes its way is currently the multipolar program, the Eurasian program that is involving more and more of the world. If we don't get on board with that, there is no alternative. The Great Reset is a boat which is worse than this boat, and it's basically going to just plummet us even deeper into the depths of the abyss and keep us there if we allow that to happen. So that's why that's not an option. It's like a submarine that's designed. So we're basically being told, get off this Titanic that's sinking while there's still time onto the submarine that has a detonation built into it, but that's going to take you about 4 kilometers down into the depths of the dark abyss. And then it'll blow up at some future time where they're going to kill you when they want to. So that versus this other boat that actually works. And they're saying, hey, just win-win cooperation here. Work with us. Hey, France, just work with us. We'll make deals together. We'll make money together. We've got these great big projects in Africa that can unite the continent. You'll make money, investment. SNC-Lavalin in Canada. You can build things again. Like SNC-Lavalin was doing with Gaddafi when they were, this construction firm was helping Gaddafi build the great man-made water system. It was a Canadian company. They weren't happy that all of their investments vaporized when NATO bombed the shit out of Libya. So, the business community has to the rational part of the business community, who are not the, because you got the legit capitalists that want to create capital. And then you got the feudal capitalists, right? Like Bill Gates or a lot of the higher up assholes at BlackRock or Wall Street Davos. Larry Fink. Feudal capitalists. They don't care about creating capital. They care about using capitalism as a cover for feudalism. That's different. So you got to separate, again, the men from the boys in that sense. And Mark Carney even warned about this, representing the worst satanic elements of this church of depopulation that he represents. He even said, when the time comes, there's going to be a choice for the business community. Those who want to be good and get on board the green train, they will be rewarded handsomely. And for those who hold on to the old ethic of value, they will be destroyed. And he said it very, very much like I just said. So did Chrystia Freeland, because they're insecure, because they know this faction that is not sort of elected, but they have power, clout. I think that's why Trump got elected in the first place, because you had a bunch of these businessmen who did bad things. They worked with the mafia in their own time. They oversaw and collaborated with bankers that overthrew governments in order to make more money and clear crop, Brazilian rainforest. They did bad things, but just like the Saudis, they saw where the wind was going and they're like, oh, fuck. We don't really have a role to play in the new system that's going to be brought online. We're supposed to disappear. And to just as a matter of basic survival, they did what they did. They disrupted the Hillary Clinton machine. Can that be done again? Bloody well hope so. And maybe in Canada, yeah, I hope we can work in the Arctic, open up some development with Alaska, with Russia and Arctic development. There's a lot of good things we could do.
On that note, we want to thank you for joining us, man. It's been a pleasure. And we got to do this again, man. We got to do this again.
Anytime.
Be safe out there. And I really appreciate this, man. Be blessed.
All right, me too. All right. Bye, everyone. Bye, Rashid.
All right, everybody. Listen, we're gonna go into a little. We're still going live. I just wanted to thank Matt for giving us. He gave us an hour of his time, an hour and a half of his time. Especially, coming off a 2 to 4 hour stream with someone else. So I think that was way more than enough, and I didn't want to tax him too much. We're not off the air. We got to go into some things because we're talking about the situation at hand and these bases. And Kabuta, thank you for just acknowledging the Red Pill Diaries. I really appreciate that. Nightly Fireflies, thank you for acknowledging the Red Pill Diaries. Listen, as the system enters that downward spiral at a rate, I would say a hypersonic rate. Right now, we're looking at it as a subsonic rate. But when those outstanding debts that has been pushed to the back, and what Gregory Mannarino said was the greatest threat to the global system. There are two major threats, he says. One is derivatives. That's just a gamble on another gamble, which is a gamble on another gamble, which is a gamble on another gamble, which is a gamble on another gamble. All right. So derivatives. And he also said that the system must continue to expand debt. The moment that the system stops, boom goes the dynamite. He said that multiple times here on this platform. I've had Gregory Mannarino on here 2 or 3, maybe even 4 times on this platform. And you can look him up at traderschoice.net and you can check his channel out on YouTube. He invests. He's a major investor. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to finance. Now, I'm saying that because he told me that, because I brought it up, I said, what, $1 trillion, 2 trillion? No, I said hundreds of trillions of dollars. He told me that the debt market, the this outstanding debt market, had roughly $2 to $5 quadrillion in outstanding debt. That once this thing blows up, it will be on the scale and worse than a nuclear exchange. This is what he told me. Now, we're going to dig into the economic situation that is underway right now, but I want to go back and just say, didn't I tell you that it was a Canadian company that did the aqueducts in Libya? Didn't I tell you that? And didn't I tell you that NATO bombed it to smithereens when it was finished? Didn't I tell you? What did Matthew Ehret just tell you? The exact stuff that I told you. I've been telling you on this platform for the longest. The Western world wanted to prevent Africa from becoming the breadbasket to the world. And that's what Muammar Gaddafi was going to use the great man-made water system for, to make fertile the desert and grow any and everything that the world could consume there. All right. Now, excuse me. Now let's go to something. We'll come back to RT, but we'll go over to the Economic Collapse blog. And I want you to listen. And I haven't read this article. I just clicked on it as we were talking with Matthew Ehret at the end of the show when he was on with us. And I saw this article, brace yourselves for an economic avalanche because a major credit crunch has already begun. Now, why am I focusing on this? It's because you remember when Matthew and I were talking, and we were talking about the base, all of the bases around the world, the base situation that America and the Western world has. They have military bases all across North Africa. I'm talking about Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Canada. Yeah, I'm going to say that again. Canada and the United States. They have bases all across North Africa. Okay. And now America is trying to push NATO eastward, not just up to Russia's borders, to constantly apply pressure on Russia from Russia's western flank, but we must be mindful that America is somewhat on Russia's eastern flank, and so is Canada. And so when we look at this, America is trying to incorporate all of these small nations to push up against Russia and China so that she can apply constant pressure all the way around them. You understand? And this takes money. So she has to invest in all of these bases under the guise of fighting for democracy, keeping the sea lanes open, and all of this stuff that she used, these mantras. But once the debt crisis goes into hypersonic mode, she is going to have to reevaluate all of her military bases, all of her escapades, and her alliances with NATO nations and everybody else. Let's go into this. I'm reading it for the first time with you, okay? I want you to listen. And in this article, the picture is a yellow warning sign of a person being swept away by avalanche, and underneath it says danger, avalanche. Maybe I can bring it to this main screen for a second just for you all to see. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can bring it to the main screen. I'm looking at multiple computers. So my main computer is right here. I have a computer right here, and I have a cell phone and another cell phone right here where when I'm interviewing and they're talking, I'm also monitoring the latest breaking news, okay? So, okay, here we are right here. I'm going to add this to the screen. I want you to see this with me, okay? Give me 1 second. And for those of you who are joining us who may be new to this, everybody also hit the like button. Hit the like button, okay? Or you can hit the dislike button, just as long as you get me in the algorithm, because they continue to take subscribers away and unsubscribe people. And they also, when you hit the bell icon, they hit the bell icon, and now you don't get any notifications when the show happens. But I'm about to add this share screen. All right, we're going to share the screen. I want you to see Microsoft Edge. Is it Microsoft Edge? Okay, yeah, here we are. Right here. So on the main screen here, you see this. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit because I want you to see this. Brace yourselves for an economic avalanche because a major credit crunch has already begun. Now look at this right here. The warning sign, danger, avalanche. And look at this. A person is being swept away in an avalanche. And what is this indicative of? And what is trying to be conveyed to the people? Do not get swept away in all of these rosy promises and rosy scenarios that the Wall Street people are giving you, that the media is giving you, that the government is giving you. Because if you do, you will be swept away when this economic avalanche intensifies. So let's go further. Okay, let's read it together. In this article, it says, this is moving even faster than a lot of us thought that it would. For weeks, I have been warning my readers about the coming credit crunch. When banks get into trouble, they start getting really tight with their money. That means fewer mortgages, fewer commercial real estate loans, fewer auto loans, and fewer credit cards being issued. But I thought that it would take some time for the credit crunch to fully kick into high gear. Unfortunately, I was wrong about that. In fact, it is being reported that during the last 2 weeks of March, bank lending in the United States contracted by a record. Listen to this. We're going to go to this. All right. So we're doing this live on the screen. So you got to roll with me. By a record. And we can do this. Let's see what it says on here when we click on it. Okay, this is from Yahoo News. Let's go up. Let's see. Commercial lending dropped by $105 billion in 2 weeks ended March 29. Okay, it says the most in Federal Reserve data back to 1973. What's significant about that? Because we were just starting, excuse me, the phone's going on. We were just starting to get into this so-called petrodollar system. Because remember, 71, the goal pushed America to cash the French holdings of U.S. treasuries and give them gold. And Richard Tricky Dick Nixon took the world off the gold and silver standard because the empire or the emperor no longer had any clothes on. And the U.S. didn't have the gold that it claimed it has. That's why there has been no audit of Fort Knox. And that's why not even senators and congressmen have been able to go into Fort Knox. Now, this is a place that is supposed to be storing the nation's gold assets, but they don't have the right to go in and do an audit. That is absolutely insane. That shows you funny money book dealing is underway. But let's go further. It says, U.S. bank lending contracted by the most on record in the last 2 weeks of March, indicating a tightening of credit conditions in the wake of several high-profile bank collapses that risk damaging the economy. In other words, we have never seen bank lending shrink faster than it did during the second half of March. Wow. And it turns out that small banks are getting particularly tight with their money. Commercial bank lending dropped nearly $105 billion in the 2 weeks ended March 29th, the most in Federal Reserve data back to 1973. The more than $45 billion decrease in the latest week was primarily due to a drop in loans by small banks. The pullback in total lending in the last half of March was broad and included fewer real estate loans as well as commercial and industrial loans. Stop right there. Stop right there. Before we go any further, stop right there. Do you remember when I was talking to you all and I was trying to convey to you the insanity of America's policies to so-called provoke, confront, and then make war with China? Because 93% of all goods on the shelves of all the stores in America come from China or a subsidiary of China, made in like an Asian or an African nation. But it is run by a Chinese company or corporation, okay? Now, China has 1.2, 1.3 trillion in U.S. bonds. Let's look at that. China has become the United States' largest creditor, largest investor, and largest trade partner. Now, to push the bounds by aggravating the situation with the Philippines, trying to go to Vietnam to stoke up tensions with China. Now, mind you, Vietnam is still dealing with the Agent Orange residue from the Vietnam War that you used chemical weapons and dropped on them. But you want to go there to stoke tensions between China and Vietnam. You're using Japan as a hedge against China. You're trying to stir up troubles between South and North Korea so that China can be preoccupied with that on the Korean Peninsula, right? And you're trying to use other means of provocations in the Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, the Sea of Japan, the Yellow Sea, and all of these surrounding bodies of water with China. At a time when the debt level of America has skyrocketed, at a time when America is seeing closures in all kind of commercial real estate, banks, and everything. Now, we see inflation skyrocketing. And we know that by when you go to the store, when you could 10 years ago or 5 years ago, when you could buy a drink, I'm just using this as an example, a 16-ounce drink for 50 cents or 80 cents. Now you get a 10-ounce drink for $1.50. And then they even curve the bottom of the can or the bottle as to make it seem like it's more than what it is. So that's hiding inflation. You're paying more for less. They run commercials to try to inundate you, to make you believe that less is more. They do it with the detergent. They do it with everything. Oh, you don't need this. This little small, powerful thing can wash a whole load. And you're paying 2, 3, 4 times because you bought into this. This is masking inflation. This is masking dollar decline because inflation eats away at the purchasing power of the currency, which means that it takes more dollars to buy less product. Okay? All right. So now we have America in her military escapades, and her congressmen are saying that, yes, I think we should deploy troops to Taiwan to stop China from invading. Hold on. Stop it. Stop it. Let's look into the bizarro madness, which is America's policy. Okay? Bizarro is the anti-Superman. So what's real in Superman's world is not real in Bizarro world. He lives in a world all to himself. So up is down and down is up, in is out and out is in, right is wrong and wrong is right, and everything is reversed. So if we look into America's policies, okay, and America's policy says that we support the one China policy. I'll bring that back up on the screen in just a second. We support the one China policy. And we believe and we adhere to that Taiwan is an integral part of China. Then how in the hell is China going to invade China? That would be saying that the U.S. government is invading one of the states in the United States when all they are doing is transitioning from one post to another post. But in Bizarro world, And the media, China is invading China. But they put it and say that China is invading Taiwan. And at the same time, you will hear them say, we adhere to the one China policy. As a matter of fact, I'm going to prove to you what I'm saying. Let me see if I can bring this up real quick. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can pull up the statement by what is his name? The guy Lindsey Graham, the congressman. Let me see if I can pull him up real quick on one of these things, because I was just looking at it prior to U.S. China. Hold on one second. Let's see if it'll come up, because I want you to hear his statement. And in his statement, it contradicts itself. Okay. Let's see. See if I can pull it up real quick. U.S. Senator. I see that senator. Okay, we have one of the senators, but I'm not senators, but congressmen, but I'm not talking about him. I'm talking about Lindsey Graham, because he said something that was so out there in the ether zone. I was like, why didn't anybody take him to task on it? Here it is. I think this is the one. I'm going to read this to you. This is an article published on RT.com. You go to the search engine and you put in, when you get to RT, you put in US, China, okay? And then you scroll down and you'll get to this article. I'm showing you the easy way for you to get to the same thing that I'm getting to, okay? This is the article. It says, U.S. open to deploying troops in Taiwan. Now stop right there. Let us stop right there. If Taiwan is considered an integral part of the one China policy that the United States, by law, listen to me good, this is stated in U.S. law, one China. Taiwan is an integral part of one China. If he is openly saying that the U.S. is open to deploying troops to Taiwan, what is he saying? That the U.S. is open to invading China. And Taiwan, the island of Taiwan lies roughly 100 miles off a little bit over 100 miles off the coast of mainland China. But it lies thousands of miles off the coast of the United States. Thousands. Okay, now listen. Let's read this, because I want you to see the insanity of these people. And this guy never served, never been in a battle in his life, but he is already committing troops to a war that the U.S. war planners have said openly that every time they war gamed it in a war game scenario, lifelike war game scenario, China has beaten them much quicker each time. And the consequences were more devastating for America on each war game. And the only war game where America was not defeated badly in the war game is that America was able to employ future weapons that she does not even have in the making, that these are thought of weapons that America would have in 20 years. And that was the only way it stopped. China still won. I want you to understand something. Even with those weapons, China still won. It just wasn't as brutal as the other scenarios. So we have the military wargaming these scenarios and telling us of the ramifications. Then you look at the economic part of it, and you see the corporations telling you, hold on, if we enter into this, there's going to be economic ramifications to the likes of which most businesses will be forced to close and shutter. And then you have this guy here the guy that took 11 or 12 times to become the Speaker of the House. Have both of them, the leading Republican and the Speaker of the House, talking about deploying troops on Chinese territory at a time where China holds 1.2 or 1.3 trillion dollars in U.S. debt, and the United States is hemorrhaging debt. They are dying. because of that. Everywhere you look, there's a business shuttering. Everywhere you look, there's unemployment. Go up under one of these interstates or one of these bridges, anywhere in America, just pick your choosing. Go ahead. And they're talking about war. I see you, Dinah. I'm going to acknowledge you, okay? And thank you for joining us. It says, U.S. open to deploying troops in Taiwan, and this has everything to do with the economic things that we were reading that we're going to go back to, okay? It says, Senator Lindsey Graham declared that he would fight for the island because it's a democracy. I want you to understand. He would fight for it. This is what it said. He would fight for the island because it's a democracy. But he's not booting up. He's not suiting up. He's not getting him an AK-47 or an M16. He's not going to be deployed over there, but he is claiming that he would fight for a portion of China because it is a so-called democracy. Man, if you don't get out of here with this foolishness, let's go further. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has declared that he would support. Now, it changed from he would fight to he would support. You see, listen to these subtle words. First, he openly declared that he would fight. He would fight. Then, when he was nudged, it says, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham has declared that he would support a formal defense alliance with Taiwan. Now, stop right there. Do you know what that is? A formal defense alliance with Taiwan. People, listen to me good. And I'm animated because I'm so passionate about these things, okay? Do you know what would be the results of the United States entering into a legally binding defense pact with Taiwan? You know what that is? That is a declaration of war against China. That would be the same as if China sent ambassadors to some of these regions of the United States that want to secede from the United States. And then they say, well, you know what? The Chinese issue a statement from one of these areas and say, you know what? We will now sign a defense pact with the sovereign territory of North Houston. I'm just making up the sovereign territory of North Houston. That is a declaration of war against the United States because that's territory acknowledged to be part of the United States. Is that not right? So look, let's go a little further. All right? I want you to listen to this. It says, Senator Lindsey Graham, excuse me, I've been on it for almost 2 hours, so let me drink a little bit more water. Senator Lindsey Graham has declared that he would support a formal defense alliance with Taiwan and would send, listen to this good, and would send U.S. troops to fight a hypothetical Chinese invasion. Hypothetical now. What is the hypothetical Chinese invasion? That China declares that they are tired of being provoked by the United States, put a blockade around Taiwan, which the U.S. war planners have already said that China could take if they wanted to. They could force Taiwan to totally submit to China before the United States could even deploy ships there. And that China has the battlefield dominance there because they have carrier killers. They have undersea drones. They have an assortment of undersea drones that are all throughout the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. And they can bombard any U.S. carrier group. Now listen, say for instance your carrier group deploys, the range of your warplane is 2,600 kilometers, right? Roughly 2,000 miles. Let's just say 2,000 miles, okay? I'm just saying, I'm just giving you hypothetical because we're dealing with hypotheticals according to this, all right? So the Chinese DL-41 has a 2,000 to 3,000 kilometer range, right? So now that means that for you to launch your warplanes to enter the fray, your warships have to be outside of that 2,000 to 3,000 kilometer range, which means that these warplanes that can fly 2,500 kilometers have to stop at the halfway point. They won't even reach the battle because they have to turn back around, or else they go into the sea because they don't have the fuel to engage. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm telling you, common sense is not so common anymore. Well, let's read a little bit more. So it says, Graham, one of the most hawkish Republicans in Congress, claimed that defending Taiwan is in the U.S. national security interest, just like defending Ukraine, just like occupying Syria, just like occupying the strategic areas of Yemen, just like occupying parts of Somalia, just like having drone bases in Nigeria, right? Just like being in Colombia and everywhere. All of these places are in the what about the national security of those nations? This is what I'm saying. I am and there is none other. That is the mind frame of Nebuchadnezzar. I am and there is none other. It doesn't matter about their sovereignty. It doesn't matter about their national interest, their national security, or the will of what their people want. All that matters is what I want. I am and there is none other. This is the easy way to alienate the entire planet. But this racist, exceptional thinking that is demonstrated on a daily basis by these leaders comes out of them as easy as a web comes out of a spider. There's no effort in this. They don't even think about it. I'm going to bring up, I was thinking about doing some video clip cuts and bringing this issue back up because I wanted people to see that there's a pattern here, even without thinking, how they disregard certain people's lives and focus on other people's lives, how they disregard certain nations' sovereignty and then they focus on other people. Anybody that they deem is worthy, they worry about their national security, even as they violate the national security, even as they violate the democracies, even as they violate the will of those people. And other people are shrugged off. I think I may do a show about that. I was thinking about that very hard last night and night before last, because I was listening to an interview by a well-respected guy. And as he was talking, and I was agreeing with a lot of what he was saying, I noticed a colonial mind state when he described certain people, and he brushed off the loss of their lives or the loss of their sovereignty, and then I'm like, I wonder why nobody even picked this up. So what I did, I went back and listened to other interviews of the person, and I'm like, whoa, okay, very intelligent person, very upfront person, but I think it's so ingrained that they don't even realize that they do this. I think this is the mentality of people who have served in high positions in the military, who have been in think tanks, and who are serving and has served in government. And it comes like walking. They get up, they walk, one foot in front of the other. No second thought about it. Until you point out to them these things, and they, oh, that's not what I meant, or that's not what but that's what you said. But let's go to Lindsey Graham real quick. And we gotta talk about this. And I'm not gonna keep y'all much longer, but let us get these points down, okay? Because we never know when we'll be blocked from coming on the air, okay? And so the article goes on and says, Fox, speaking to Fox News on Sunday, the Republican lawmaker claimed that the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan, under which Washington recognizes, listen to this, Washington recognizes but does not endorse China's sovereignty over the island. Stop right there. So in the beginning, he says that he would fight for Taiwan. Then he changed it and said that he would support defending Taiwan and deploying troops to Taiwan because China may invade. And in the same article, just two sentences below it, they acknowledge that the United States policy, which is law, right? Which is law, U.S. law, is that it recognizes Taiwan to be a part of a sovereign China. So, in essence, what these congressmen are saying is that we are for the violation of our own laws to further our interests at the sake of ruining somebody else's sovereignty and unity. This is what it's saying. I didn't write the article. I didn't make the statements. But do you see the racist, exceptional mind state of this? And you can take this with any other politicians. They contradict themselves constantly. Let's go a little further. So it says, U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan, under which Washington recognizes Taiwan, recognizes but does not endorse China's sovereignty over the island, is not working and should be replaced with a formal defense agreement. Stop right there. Now let's go to something, okay? You know, I like to have an informed discussion with informed and enlightened people, okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to see what was trying to be conveyed, okay? According to the dictionary, the word recognized, it's a verb. It means identify someone or something from having encountered them before. Know again. Acknowledge the existence, the validity, or the legality of. So let's go back to that article for a second, all right? Speaking to Fox News on Sunday, the Republican lawmaker claimed that the U.S. policy, meaning U.S. law, okay, of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan, under which Washington recognizes, listen to this. Well, what does Washington recognize? According to the dictionary, it acknowledges the existence and the validity and the legality of what? Let's go back. China's sovereignty over the island of Taiwan. Do you see that? This is the dictionary. I didn't make this up. I'm reading this along with you. So let's go further. And this is a quote from Lindsey Graham. So the question for the Congress, should we have a defense agreement with the island of Taiwan? But you just acknowledged that U.S. law states that China has full validity and legality over the island of Taiwan. You just said it in your own speech. Because it's in our national interest, he says, I'd be very much open to using U.S. forces to defend a portion of China, which is Taiwan now, because it's in our national interest to do so. What's in your national interest to go to war with China? Your largest manufacturer, your largest trade partner, your largest infrastructure investor, your largest investor, right? What says going to war over a portion of China is in your national interest? I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm asking you. Now, listen to what he says thereafter. I told you, only in bizarro world, okay? Now, after stating all that, he goes and says, and this is a quote, I believe in a one China policy. Well, isn't that the law? Because the United States policy is one China, and that Taiwan is an inherent, inalienable part of the one China. That's U.S. law. So now, after doing all of this military bluster, he goes and acknowledges this. I believe in the one China policy. But, now the but nullifies everything he said before that. But I would be willing to fight for Taiwan because Taiwan is a democracy. But political doublespeak. Political doublespeak. Now, let's go back to something. The economic ramifications of those type of thinkers and policymakers right there. Lindsey Graham, and then the Speaker of the House, who had to fight and beg and borrow and scheme and bribe to become the Speaker of the House. What did he go through? 11 or 12 votes every time he was denied. All right, but let's go back to the economic part of it. So I'm gonna pull this back up on the screen. Add the screen. All right, now let's go. Let me see if I can pull it back up. Okay, here we are. It says, as I have previously noted, small and mid-sized banks provide the bulk of the commercial real estate loans in this country. We are already starting to see prices for commercial real estate plunge, and now Morgan Stanley is warning that the drop that we will ultimately see could rival the decline during the 2008 financial crisis. Now, what is so important about that is because that is when they said America entered a recession. And according to the definition, multiple recessions back to back, or a recession that lasts more than 16 to 18 months, is no longer considered a recession. It is considered a depression, right? So if we go back to 2008 and we're still feeling the ramifications of it, and we're in 2023, what have we been living in right now this whole time? A financial and economic, let's say the word together, depression. So let's go further. And it says, investors have sharpened their focus on this sector, giving regional banks significant share in CRE lending. Even before the banking industry turmoil, however, CRE was facing risks from long-term trends with remote work threatening the office subsector. Now, it says, what's more, the sector is now facing a huge refinancing wall. More than half of the $2.9 trillion in commercial mortgages will be up for refinancing in the next couple of years. I'll stop right there. I want to get to something real quick on the. So give me a second, everybody. Just bear with me because I'm doing this multiple computers, 2 phones, and I'm trying to bring a point home to you all. So let me go here real quick. Let's go to the Red Pill Diaries. Let's go to videos. Let me try to go to some old videos because I want to show you something. Okay, I want to show you that what I'm saying is the truth. All right. So, and these are clips from my show, not from anybody else's show. Okay, let's see. And so, I don't want to play a long clip from my show. I'm trying to find a short one so that you can understand just how bad the debt crisis is. Okay, let's see if I can scroll down to a year ago. I wish it was some way that you could just go straight to the certain things on here. And you know I'm not computer literate, but be just mindful and be patient with your brother as I try to get this truth out to you. Okay. God, I didn't know I had these many videos up here. So let's see. If I don't pull it up here, I'm going to pull up one similar to it on the dashboard. You can believe that. Let's go down 1 year. They don't have them in a particular order, but I want you to. Here we go. Let's go down to Scott Ritter. Let's see. Is this it? I don't know if this is it. Hold on, let me see. All right. I hope it. No, that's not it. That's not it. Anyway, Gregory Manarino was telling me that the debt situation is so dire that is unbelievable. And that most people, he said there's going to be a major loss of life when this thing comes crashing down. Now, how does that connect with Taiwan, China, and all of this stuff? Again, let's go back to something. 1.2 to 1.3 trillion in U.S. treasuries. They are a deep buyer of farmland and infrastructure in America. Right? They do a lot of finance. They are the largest manufacturer in the world. Your motherboards, some of your chips, your uniforms, your almost all of America's rare earths that she uses in every military gadget, every technological gadget comes from China. Almost all. Now, what if China, in the midst of this so-called deployment or coming to the aid of Taiwan, what if China just bans the export and bans any nation from re-exporting what they buy from China, or else China will stop supplying them of rare earth minerals? That alone will do damage to the economies. What if China say, you know what? I'm going to put a halt to all cargo ships coming your way. Because by far, America gets more cargo ships from China than any other nation. Because China is America's largest trading nation. And to put it to boot, China says, you know what, since you are aiding them, Europe, I'm going to stop shipping to you. China is Europe's largest trading partner and largest financer. Right? So now what we have is a economic meltdown of the West. China calls in the 1.2, 1.3 trillion in bonds. The United States refuses to pay. That is going to cause a stampede out of the dollar because other nations will see that America is no longer credit worthy and is no longer standing on her word to redeem her bonds. This will cause a mass stampede out of the dollar, which means inflation will shoot up. And the dollars that are around the world will come flooding home, meaning that we are now in a stage of super hyperinflation, which means that now your dollar will not buy you hardly anything. And now that means that it is very hard for America to service her debt. And that means now that she has to do a real appraisal of her bases around the world, which means that she can no longer maintain or service all of these warships, warplanes, and bombers. You remember what happened to Russia, the Soviet Union, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they had to make so many choices because of the debt burden? And how they had to mothball all kind of plans. Remember that? Do you remember that? Do you remember how they had to reorganize? And they had the most of their bases that they had in their near abroad, which is in the former Soviet republics, they had to bring those people home. And look what it led up to right now. The war that took place in Georgia and the war in Ukraine. And now a head-up collision with the U.S. and NATO, all on the collapse of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union disbanded and because of the debt burden. But the difference is the Soviet Union, these people had, in the Soviet Union, they had their own farms. They grew their own food. That used to be a case. I remember growing up, I was telling my mom about this the other day. I was over her house drinking coffee, and we were talking about in the 70s and stuff when I was growing up. And I was telling us, about how things were so much different than they are now. And you could go through all the neighborhoods. There were all kind of fruit trees, all kind of things that now that you have to go exclusively to grocery stores to get. They were all throughout the neighborhood. Every other person in the neighborhood had a garden. That is not the case today. So the collapse of the Soviet Union is not the perfect example of America, because it's going to be much greater. And think about the debt burden of America. Her open debt, 30-some trillion. We already heard the professor say back 10 years ago that it was over $222 trillion. That was 10 years ago. And now we see the debt market between $2 and $5 quadrillion. You tell me, and you let me know how that's going to work out. I'm just asking, because because people don't take these things in consideration. They are pushing for war because they believe that to destabilize and to occupy and to divide will give them a little bit of time, and they don't understand that they are alienating the very people who fund their escapades and fund their living standards. And to antagonize and provoke those people, they can pull the rug from up under you. And yeah, you may have some stuff stored up because you're in a higher position. But what about the masses that will be caught lacking? This is what Gregory Manarino was talking about. When this thing goes down, there will be a massive, massive loss of life. Then he paused and he said, it will be biblical. This is what he told me. You can go look at some of the interviews. I think I have a couple of them on Patreon, but I have a few of them on this channel right here. It will be biblical. Okay? So I'm telling you these things because people seem like they are not paying attention to the reality of the situation. They are living in hubris. They're still inebriated on, like Nebuchadnezzar, on the power, the influence, the wealth, and the riches that he used to have. Look at what my hands have wrought. Now, 20 years ago, you could have invaded Taiwan. China wouldn't have offered you much military resistance because you had the greatest navy on the planet. That is not the case today. Not only does China have the largest army, and a modern army at that, they have the largest and a modern navy too. They have the largest navy, and they are only outpacing the United States by dozens every few months. With a manufacturing capacity like that, they cannot catch up to them. So the ships that America was supposed to decommission this year and last year, they're trying to refurbish them because they cannot keep up with the manufacturing capacity of the Chinese shipbuilding. And you want to make war with them. When China just demonstrated last year, they sent a hypersonic missile that flew the entire circumference around the world at hypersonic speeds, and it was controlled all the way by China, and it hit its target. The USA missed its target by a few hundred meters, but the report is that it hit it spot on, close to spot on. And you want to make war with them. Do you see the insanity of this? Sometimes it boggles my mind that nobody talks about these things. You go, they touch upon it, they brush upon it in other alternative media, but they never go into depth about it. And the ramifications of if America goes to war with China, how bad things will be for you. The people at the bottom, the people at the middle, the entire middle class will be wiped out. This is not me saying, this is Gregory Manarino saying. He knows more about finance than I do. The people at the bottom will fare better than the people in the middle because the people at the bottom never had. So they knew how to make do with what they had, even though they'll be hurt. But the people in the middle are going to catch hell because they're going to lose everything. Oh, wow. You hear Lindsey Graham say, let them eat cake. That's what he's saying. Forget about the debt that they hold on. Forget about how much they supply us with goods. Forget about how they're still accepting our currency. Forget about all of that stuff there. Let's support Taiwan because it's in our national interest. And he lets the cat out of the bag of why he really wants to go to war with China over Taiwan. And remember that we have the definition that America recognizes the legitimacy of China, mainland China's rights over Chinese Taipei, which is Taiwan. And also, let me mind that Taiwan in international circles is not even referred to as Taiwan. It is called the Republic of China. So, I mean, these people, they are insane. But let's go back to something because he lets the cat out the bag. I want to go a little further before we start closing out, okay? I do want to play an economic thing about it. But listen, And maybe I might not get to the, because I've had you so long, I won't keep y'all too much longer. Maybe I'll play it on the next show. But I want to go to something. It says, I'd be very much open to using U.S. forces to defend Taiwan because it's in our national security interest to do so. I believe in a one China policy, the contradictions here, but I would be willing to fight for Taiwan because Taiwan is a democracy. You think that is what he's talking about? Nah, Let's go a little further. He continued, later adding that the U.S. has an economic incentive to fight China over the island. Listen to what he says. 90% of the high-end chips, he's talking about around the world, are made in Taiwan. He said China would have a monopoly on the global economy. That is why they're talking about going to war with China. Because if China uses its military or even its economic power and brings Taiwan completely back into the fold of the mainstream, America no longer has that outpost out there in the Taiwan Strait. So she can't pass through the Taiwan Strait because those are Chinese territorial waters. So now she has to go around if China doesn't let her pass through the strait. And on top of that, 90% of all of the advanced chips that go into pretty much everything are produced on Chinese Taipei or Taiwan. And America needs that to try to stall her fall and reinvigorate her economy and her military. That's why he let the cat out the bag right there. So all of this stuff about democracy, that's just a cover show for the reality of what's going on. They don't want you to know the reality of what's going on. And the reality is that America is a desperate, declining global power that is reaching for straws. I gotta play this clip that I often play on this show. Okay, this is 4 minutes. Give me 7 more minutes with you all. Okay, I have to go do some things too. I have a family, but give me 7 more minutes with you all. Let me play this 4-minute clip that I played before. All right, and then from that we'll wrap up the show. But this goes hand in hand with China. Okay, in the U.S.
Well, the most dramatic emergence of the new blocs in the world is the Chinese bloc. China's allies now include not just Russia, and China has backed Russia throughout this war in Ukraine, particularly the economic warfare question. China has bought more oil. China is providing supports of all kinds. But the Chinese have their own objectives, and those include building a new global system with multiple blocs, one of which is grouped around China. And it now has the active partnership of India, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. I could go on, but it's enough. The control of the global oil business, the control of the 2 largest countries by population in the world, China and India, ought to give everybody pause. India has bought the oil and the gas that Russia can't sell in Western Europe. Other countries are doing the same. Sanctions threatened against other countries for doing business with Russia and China have had very poor results. They just don't care. China offers the world an alternative. You can disagree with the United States. You can fashion your own economic strategic plan. You can clash with the United States because there's somewhere else to go. China, India, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the growing allies, the BRICS group, and the new members of that coming down the pike. It's a new world. This war has exposed economic nationalism as the new ideological reality governing the world economic system. It's exposed the decline of the United States. If I had more time, I would take you through the development of an alternative reserve currency, the petro yuan, Saudi Arabia and China getting together. They're developing their own alternative to the SWIFT system, a global payment system, a global currency system that simply doesn't end run around the United States. Yeah, it'll take more time. These things are slow to work out all the problems, but they're now underway. And the longer and the worse that the war in the Ukraine gets, the more determined the opponents of the United States' shrinking position will be. The more clearly they will understand they too need to develop an alternative because the United States is no longer the reliable governor of the world system. It was for a while. Who will dare keep their reserves where the United States could get its hands on them? Every country in the world is watching the guardian of the system play favorites. And that's gone way beyond what it was before, as this war has made clear.
So now you have the truth. You really have the truth of what's actually taking place, and don't let them fool you with this foolishness. Don't allow them to distract you, like Lindsey Graham was trying to distract you with this mantra of democracy. When in reality it was ulterior motives that they have to push forward other plans to try to maintain the Western so-called quote unquote rules-based order that is led by the United States, and they're willing to give you as much disinformation as they want. If it can resonate with you, then you'll go along with the empire and you'll wind up being the loser. Don't be the loser. Now, in closing, I want to say I want to say to you all, each and every one of you, thank you for giving me your time. Always, we say that time is what? The most precious commodity and asset one can have. Because once time is used up, you can never get it back. So we thank you for giving us 2.5 hours of your time to give you this truth. We want you to join us tomorrow at 11:45 if they allow us to come on the air to give you more truth. Tell others about it. Invite a friend, invite somebody else. And always know that we love you. But remember that if you love truth, we love you. And remember that God will always love you best. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay things, stay righteous. And I gotta say it, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Peace. Deuces, everybody.